She dug a trench in April, and everyone laughed. A widow, alone on a Montana homestead with a 7-year-old son, a mule, 2 goats, and a winter that would drop to 30 below. No money for a better stove. No family within 500 miles. No reason by any practical measure to believe she was going to be fine. But Martha Hale had her father's mind. The kind that looks at a problem and asks not can I afford to fix this, but how does it actually work? And what she figured out, scratching calculations on brown paper in the April mud, was that the earth itself was already doing something useful, already holding warmth, already waiting to be asked. So she picked up a pickaxe and she asked. By December, her cabin floor was warm. Her goats were thriving. Her neighbors were stopping by with borrowed bowl excuses, pressing their palms flat against her floorboards, going home quieter than they'd arrived. By spring, the whole valley wanted what she'd built, and that's when the trouble started. Because somewhere in Helena, a man with a surveyor's stamp and a contractor's letters had submitted his version of her idea to the Territorial Agricultural Society. Unbuilt, theoretical, beautifully documented, and the committee had a deadline, and credentials counted for more than a widow's account book, and the guide was going to print. Martha had 2 weeks, 1 engineer, and 1 8-year-old boy with a journal full of temperature readings. She intended to use all 3. The thermometer nailed to the trading post wall read 4 degrees above zero the morning Clyde Reddick rode past the Hale homestead and saw smoke rising not from the chimney, but from the ground itself. He pulled his horse to a stop and stared. A thin, steady curl of pale smoke drifted up from a flat stone set in the frozen earth 20 feet from the cabin wall, as if the ground itself were breathing. Every window in the little cabin glowed amber. The goat shed beside it glowed too. And old Clyde, who had wintered in Montana for 19 years and buried 2 toes to frostbite, sat on his horse in the blue pre-dawn cold and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time when looking at another woman's homestead. He felt curious. He felt, against every expectation,
that's it, keep it steady,
envious.
I
3
found
months
something.
earlier, on a warm September afternoon, Ben Hale
Artifact
sat on the
of saga
split-rail
fact. Can I
fence
keep it?
watching his
Nothing.
mother drag a pickaxe through the dirt, and he asked the question every 7-year-old eventually asks when the work looks strange and the neighbors are already laughing. Mama, why can't we just do it the regular way? Martha paused. She pressed the back of her wrist to her forehead and looked at her son. His father's brown eyes, her father's stubborn jaw, and she chose her answer carefully. Because the regular way, she said, is what regular people can afford. Ben considered this. A meadowlark called from the fence post at the garden's edge. Are we not regular people? We are practical people, Martha said, and drove the pickaxe back into the earth.
I found something!
She didn't say anything more about it that afternoon.
There!
Artifact of saga
fact.
But the word settled into him, the way seeds settle into turned soil. Quietly, without announcement, already beginning the slow work of becoming something. Practical. It was the whole story, really. Everything that followed came from that one word. The homestead had come to Martha by way of grief. Her husband, Daniel Hale, had filed the claim in the spring of 1885. 160 acres of bottomland and slope east of Willow Bench, Montana Territory, with a creek running through the lower pasture and a stand of ponderosa pine on the ridge that Daniel had talked about turning into a proper barn someday. He'd built the 1-room cabin in the summer, a solid enough structure of chinked log
with
a single stone fireplace at the north wall,
Let me see.
and 1 window facing east to catch the morning.
Artifact of saga fact. Can I keep
He
it?
was dead before the first snow fell. A fever, Sudden, indifferent, complete. He was gone in 4 days, and Martha found herself standing in a Montana autumn with a 6-year-old boy, 2 goats, a mule named Porter, 1 winter's worth of provisions, if she stretched them carefully, and a fireplace that devoured wood like it had a personal grievance against the forest. She had no family within 500 miles. Daniel's brother Franklin lived in St. Louis and sent a letter expressing his sympathies and nothing else. The nearest neighbor of any real proximity was Dorothea Voss, a German widow 3/4 of a mile north, who was kind but quietly consumed by her own difficulties. The town of Willowbench was 4 miles west along a wagon road that turned to boot-sucking mud in the rain and iron-hard ruts in the cold. Martha had grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a millwright who believed that understanding how a thing worked was more valuable than any amount of money you could spend having someone else fix it for you. She had apprenticed, informally and without title, at her father's elbow. She knew how water moved, how wood expanded and contracted, how a poorly fitted joint would fail before a well-fitted one. She could read a problem the way other people read print, slowly at first, then all at once. The first winter after Daniel died, she burned through wood at a rate that frightened her. The fireplace was inefficient, pulling as much cold air down the chimney as it pushed warm air into the room. She stuffed rags in the window gaps and hung a wool blanket across the doorframe at night.
Let me see.
And she and Ben slept in their coats more nights than she liked to count.
Can I keep ink?
She made it through. But in the spring, when the ground softened and the smell of mud and pine came back into the world, Martha sat down on the cabin step with a stub of pencil and a piece of brown paper and began to think about heat. Not about buying more wood she could cut if her back held. Not about a better stove. She had no money for a better stove, and no way to get one installed before October, even if she sold something she couldn't afford to sell. She thought about heat the way her father had taught her to think about water. Where does it come from? Where does it go? How do you stop it from going where you don't want it? She thought about the root cellar. It was already dug, 4 feet deep, 8 feet square,
keep it steady.
Covered with a heavy plank door set into the north slope of the yard.
Oh, there!
In winter, the root cellar stayed cold enough to preserve food but never froze hard. The earth itself was keeping it at a stable temperature, buffering it from the brutal air above. The earth was, in other words, already doing thermal work, already holding warmth relative to the sky. She thought about Roman hypocausts. She'd read about them in a book her father had kept, a translated Latin text on architecture that she'd understood perhaps a third of at age 12 and perhaps 2/3 of now. Rooms heated from below, heat moving through channels in the floor, rising, filling a space from the ground up. She thought about the fire pit she used for laundry in summer, standing detached and open 20 feet from the cabin wall. She picked up the pencil.
That's it, keep it steady.
She began to draw.
I found something!
What she sketched that April morning, corrected twice, then redrawn on the back of the paper with better proportions, was a flue system. A fire pit, roofed and adjustable, set in the yard. From its base, a stone-lined channel running underground, pitched at a shallow grade, passing beneath the floor of the goat shed, then continuing beneath the floor of the root cellar, then running under the cabin floor itself before rising into the existing chimney. The earth around the channel would absorb heat from the passing air and re-radiate it slowly. The floors would warm from below. The goats would be warmer, which meant they'd eat less and produce more milk under stress. She sat with the drawing for a long time. Then she went to find her pickaxe. She had 5 months before the cold came back. She intended to use every one of them.
I found something!
She started the trench on the 14th of April. The ground was soft from snowmelt,
Cannot paint.
which was the only reason the first day's work was manageable. She dug from the fire pit location inward, setting string lines to maintain her grade, using a flat-bladed spade for the channel floor and the pickaxe for anything that resisted. Ben, who was 7 now and serious about helping in the way that 7-year-olds are serious, completely committed, intermittently useful, carried dirt in a bucket to the garden border, where it would eventually become raised beds. The work was hard and slow. By the end of the first week, she had 20 feet of open trench. That was when Harold Fenwick saw it. Fenwick ran a modest cattle operation 1.5 miles east and made a point of riding the valley roads on Saturdays to,
That's it, keep it steady.
as he put it,
I found
keep an
something.
eye on things.
Let me see.
He pulled up at Martha's fence line
Artifact
and looked at the
artifact.
trench for
Can I
a
keep
long
ink?
moment.
Cannot paint.
"What in the Sam Hill are you digging, Mrs. Hale?" Martha explained. She was concise, accurate, and genuinely unbothered by his expression. "An underground... what?" "A flue." He repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. "Underground. Heat rises from the channel into the floor structure above it," Martha said. "The earth around the stone lining acts as a heat sink. It's a simpler version of how the Romans warmed their buildings." "The Romans," Fenwick said. "Yes." He looked at the trench. He looked at Martha. He looked at young Ben, standing at the garden border with a bucket of dirt and an expression
keep
of
it steady.
complete
I
seriousness.
found something.
"Well,"
Let me see.
Fenwick said, gathering his
Oh,
reins,
there!
Artifact
"I suppose if a
artifact.
person has
Can I
enough
keep ink?
time on their
Cannot paint.
hands." He rode on. Martha watched him go. Then she picked up her spade and went back to work. That was how it began. The doubts came in the ordinary way, not all at once in a dramatic flood, but in slow accumulation, the way water finds its way through a fieldstone wall, a trickle here, another there, until one morning you notice the floor is wet. The first real difficulty was stone. Martha's design required flat, tight-fitting stone for the channel walls and floor, shale if she could find it, any close-grained sedimentary rock that would hold heat without cracking under thermal stress. There was plenty of stone on her property, but
That's it,
most
keep
of
it
it
steady.
was rounded river
I
cobble
found
from the
something.
creek bed,
Let me see.
which would not lay
Oh,
flat,
there!
and fieldstone
Artifact
from the upper
artifact. Can I
pasture,
keep ink?
which
Cannot
was
paint.
irregular and harder to work. Getting it out was a week's work. Getting it down the slope without injuring herself or Ben or losing half the pieces was another challenge she had not fully planned for, involving a travois made from pine poles and a series of trips that left her shoulders aching for 3 days. But she got it. She got it, and she laid it. The trench slowly became a channel. Stone floor, stone walls, each piece fitted as tightly as she could manage. The joints chinked with a clay and sand mixture she mixed herself in a half-barrel. She worked section by section, roofing each segment with flat capstones before moving to the next, leaving the whole thing open for
That's it,
inspection
keep it
at
steady.
the end of each week,
I found something.
checking for settling,
Let me see.
checking for
Oh,
level.
there!
Artifact
It was mid-May
artifact.
when
Can I keep
Dorothea
ink?
Voss
Cannot
came
paint.
to call. Dorothea was a small, neat woman of 53 who wore her gray hair in a braid and had opinions she shared with the gentle but absolute certainty of someone who has lived long enough to feel she has earned them. She walked the 3/4 of a mile down from her place with a jar of pickled beets and stood at the edge of the trench work for a considerable time without speaking. "Martha," she finally said, "I am not certain this will work." "It might not," Martha agreed. "The Romans." Dorothea tasted the word as Fenwick had, but more thoughtfully. "You've read about this?" "My father's book. And I've thought it through from first principles."
That's it, keep it steady.
Dorothea
I
looked at the
found
channel.
something. Let me
She
see.
looked at the fire pit,
Oh there!
which Martha had already
Artifact
roofed with
of
a
side
hinged
effect.
Can I
stone
keep it?
cap on
Cannot
an
paint.
iron rod. She looked at the junctions where the channel passed under the shed floor, which Martha had framed up on short posts to allow the channel to pass below. The cold here is not Roman cold, Dorothea said. In January it will be 30 below, perhaps more. Which is why a fireplace alone isn't sufficient, Martha said. The heat goes up and out. This keeps it in the ground and the floor. The earth is already 40 degrees a few feet down. I'm using that as a base. Dorothea was quiet for another moment. What does it cost you if it fails? The summer's digging and stonework. We go back to burning wood the old way.
It's all right, my
And if
dear.
it works,
Everything will be just fine.
But
we
I'm
stay
scared.
warm.
It's so dark
The
outside.
goats stay warm.
I know, but we're
use
safe and
half
warm
the
in
wood.
here.
Okay.
Dorothea
better now.
nodded slowly. Then she handed Martha the pickled beets and walked home. In June, the doubts shifted from stone and engineering to something less tangible: the talk in Willow Bench. Martha went to town twice a month for supplies, and she was aware that the story of her trench had traveled the 4 miles from her homestead to the trading post and the feed store and the small white church on the corner of Front and Second, with a speed that confirmed how thoroughly she and her son had become a topic of local interest. She heard it indirectly, a too quiet conversation that stopped when she walked in, a too cheerful greeting from the feed store clerk who was clearly trying not to laugh. And she heard it directly, once, from Ida Mae
It's all right,
Colburn,
my dear.
who
Everything will
ran
be
the
just fine.
millinery and
I'm
believed
scared. It's so
strongly
dark
in the
outside.
social obligation
I
of
know,
plain
but we're
speaking.
safe and warm in here.
Okay.
People are
I feel
saying
better
you've gone
now.
a bit strange, Martha, Ida Mae said, without cruelty but without softening either. Digging up your yard that way. Children need stability. People are wondering if you're managing. I'm digging a heating system, Martha said. In the ground. In the ground. Ida Mae looked at her for a long moment. Can I ask you something honestly? You usually do. Are you sure about this? Not sure the way a person's sure when they want to be done doubting and just move forward. Sure the way you'd stake your winter on it. Martha paid for her flour and her lamp oil. She picked up the wrapped parcels. Yes, she said. That's exactly
It's all right,
the
my
kind
dear.
of sure I
Everything will
am.
be just fine.
But I'm
She
scared.
drove
It's so dark
Porter
outside.
back down the wagon
I
road
know,
in the
but we're
long
safe and
June
warm in
light.
here.
Okay.
The parcels
I feel better
stacked
now.
behind the seat, Ben asleep against her arm with his hat over his face. The meadow grass was tall and green, and the creek glittered in the distance. She ran through the calculations in her head the way she had run through them 100 times. Heat loss, draft, floor area, the insulation of the walls, the temperature differential between the shale channel and the cabin floor joists. The doubt was real. She wasn't foolish enough to pretend it wasn't. An untested system, designed from memory and inference, built with her own hands in soil she'd known for more than a year. But doubt, she had found, was not the same thing as a reason to stop. She clicked her tongue at Porter, and the mule moved on.
It's all right, my dear. Everything will be just
The channel
fine.
was
I'm
complete by the
scared.
1st
It's so
of
dark
August.
outside.
Martha spent
I
one
know,
full
but we're
day on
safe
her
and warm
hands
in
and
here.
knees,
Okay.
crawling the entire
I feel
length,
better now.
fire pit to chimney junction, checking every capstone, pressing her hand against every joint, verifying the draft with a candle set at the fire pit end, while Ben held a second candle above the chimney cap at the cabin end. When the second candle's flame leaned outward and the first leaned inward, she sat back on her heels and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since April. The draft was right. The system would draw. She built a small test fire in the pit that evening. Just dry pine scraps, not enough to overheat anything, and sat on the cabin floor with her palm flat against the plank boards while Ben sat at the table eating his supper and watching her with the patient curiosity of a child who has
It's all right,
learned
my
that his
dear.
mother's
Everything will be
focused
just fine.
silences
I'm scared. It's
are
so
worth
dark
waiting
outside.
out.
I know, but we're
After
safe
20
and warm in
minutes,
here.
she felt
Okay.
it.
I feel
Not
better
warmth exactly. Not yet. A lessening of cold. A faint, slow change in the temperature of the wood against her palm, so subtle she might have imagined it if she hadn't been paying very close attention. She looked up at Ben. "Feel the floor," she said. He scrambled down from the bench and pressed both palms flat on the boards. His expression went from interested to genuinely surprised. "It's less cold," he said. "Yes." "Does that mean it worked?" Martha sat up and looked at her son in the amber light of the lamp. "It means it's going to work," she said. "Come September, we'll know for certain." Something else began the
It's all right,
following
my dear.
Sunday.
Everything will be just
Though
fine.
Martha did not
I'm
think
scared.
of it
It's
that
so
way.
dark outside.
She had
I
gone
know,
to
but we're
church,
safe and warm in
something
here.
she did
Okay.
once or twice a
I
month,
feel better now.
more for the social obligation of it than anything else, being a practical woman about most things, including faith, and had found herself sitting 2 pews ahead of a man she didn't recognize. New to the valley, apparently. She heard his name from Dorothea afterward. Elias Marsh, a carpenter from Illinois who had come west to take on building work in the territory and had arrived in Willowbench with a toolbox, a good reputation, and no clear plan to stay or to go. She wouldn't have thought about him further except that, after the service, when Harold Fenwick loudly retold the story of Martha's underground flue to a small audience on the church steps, with the amused condescension of a man describing an entertaining eccentricity,
It's all right, my
Elias
dear.
Marsh had
Everything will be
listened
just
with what
fine.
appeared to be
But I'm
genuine
scared. It's so
interest
dark outside.
rather than
I
amusement.
know, but we're safe and warm
He
in
caught
here.
her eye
Okay.
as the group
I
dispersed.
feel better now.
"Did it draw properly?" he asked. "Just that." Martha blinked. It was not the question she was expecting. "It drew," she said. "I tested it last week." He nodded once, as if this confirmed something he had already thought likely, and then touched the brim of his hat and walked to his horse. Martha watched him go. She found she was slightly more interested in attending church next Sunday. September arrived and took the warmth with it in the abrupt, decisive way of Montana autumns. 4 days of golden cool, then a hard frost that killed the garden greens overnight and put a skim of ice on the stock trough by morning.
It's all right, my dear.
Martha lit
Everything
the
will be
first
just
real
fine.
fire in
But
the
I'm
pit
scared.
on the
It's so
8th of
dark
September.
outside.
I know,
Not a
but we're
test
safe
fire.
and warm in here.
A full, managed
I
fire,
feel better now.
banked with split hardwood and controlled by the adjustable stone cap that regulated airflow and, therefore, temperature. She had made a thermometer of sorts, a simple spirit tube calibrated against a mercury instrument she'd borrowed from Dorothea for a week. It wasn't precise, but it would tell her whether the floor and the air at floor level were measurably warmer than ambient outdoor temperature. By noon, the cabin floor was perceptibly warm to the touch. By mid-afternoon, the goat shed was warmer than it had any right to be, both animals standing in a notably more relaxed posture than usual, which Martha took as meaningful data. Ben sat on the floor and ate his lunch down there rather than at the table, on the grounds that
It's
the
all right,
floor
my
was
dear.
interesting.
Everything will be just fine.
Martha
But I'm
allowed
scared.
this.
It's so dark outside.
Scientific
I know,
observation
but we're
took
safe
many
and warm in
forms.
here.
Okay.
She went
I feel better
outside
now.
3 times that afternoon to verify that the system was drawing correctly, checking the smoke from the chimney, checking the pit, checking for any smell of smoke coming up through the floorboards that might indicate a failed joint in the channel. There was nothing. The draft was clean, the heat was real, and by the time the sun dropped behind the ridge and the temperature outside fell to 31 degrees, the cabin was 58 degrees at floor level. She sat down at the table that evening and wrote it all in her account book. The date, the temperature, the wood used, the heat achieved. Because she was a practical woman, and practical women kept records. Ben, already in his sleeping corner with the quilt pulled up and his face showing a degree of
It's all right, my
contentment
dear.
unusual
Everything will be
for
just
a child
fine.
who normally
I'm
fought
scared.
bedtime,
It's so dark outside.
said from
I
across the
know,
room.
but we're safe and warm in here.
Mama,
Okay,
it's
I feel
warm.
better now.
Yes, Martha said. You were right. She looked at her numbers. She looked at her son. Let's see how January feels, she said. October proved the system better than September had, because October tried harder to defeat it. The first week brought sleet that glazed every surface and turned the wagon road into a treacherous, glittering ribbon. The second week brought 3 inches of snow, then a clearing, and a sharp drop that put the morning temperature at 12 degrees. Martha managed the fire with the careful attention of someone tending something precious, banking it at night, opening the draft at dawn, adjusting the stone cap through the day to keep the channel temperature in
It's
the
all right, my
range
dear.
she wanted.
Everything will be just fine.
The
I'm
floor
scared.
stayed
It's so
warm.
dark outside.
The goats,
I know, but
2
we're
nanny
safe and
goats,
warm in
Pepper
here.
and Clove, both
I
of
feel
whom
better
had
now.
endured the previous winters with stoic misery, spent their days lying down at the far end of the shed, which was directly over the channel junction, with the specific air of animals that have unexpectedly discovered comfort. Their milk production did not drop the way it usually dropped in October. Martha noted this in the account book with the brevity she reserved for important things. October 14th, milk holding, P 2.1 quart, C 1.8 quart, normal for September. It was around the 3rd week of October that people began to stop, not to ask questions. Not exactly. Montana people in 1886 did not easily arrive at a neighbor's property and admit to curiosity
It's
about
all right,
her
my
methods.
dear. Everything will be just
They
fine.
stopped for
I'm
ordinary
scared. It's
reasons.
so dark outside.
Fenwick
I know,
stopped
but we're
to say
safe
he'd
and warm
seen
in
one of
here.
her fence
Okay.
posts healing
I
over
feel
on the
better now.
east side and thought she ought to know. His wife, Beryl, stopped with a recipe she claimed she'd been meaning to bring for months. The Van Leeuwen brothers, who ran a mixed farm 2 miles south and had the combined conversational range of a fence post, stopped because they had been going past anyway. But they all looked at the cabin. They all noticed the smoke from the pit, the absence of a roaring fireplace visible through the window, the general settled comfort of the place in weather that had the rest of the valley battening down and burning through their woodpiles. And once, she was not sure how it happened exactly, 3 of them were inside at once. Beryl Fenwick, Dorothea Voss, and a young woman named
It's all right, my
Clara
dear.
Mott,
Everything will be
who
just
had
fine.
arrived 6
I'm
months
scared.
ago
It's
with
so
her
dark
husband from
outside.
Wisconsin.
I know, but
and
we're
was
safe
finding
and warm
her
in
first
here.
Montana winter
I feel
a
better now.
comprehensive education in how severely she had underestimated the climate. Clara Mott had come ostensibly to return a borrowed mixing bowl. She sat down at Martha's table and did not leave for 2 hours, because the cabin was warm in a way that her own cabin had never been, and she was young enough and honest enough to say so directly. "How is it this warm?" Clara asked. "I can't get our place above 50 even with the stove going full." Martha explained. She got out the brown paper with the original sketch and walked Clara through it. The channel, the draft, the heat sink principle, the way the earth held and re-radiated warmth rather than letting it escape through the chimney
It's all right, my
and
dear.
into the sky.
Everything will be just
Clara
fine.
listened with the
I'm
focused
scared. It's so
attention
dark
of someone
outside.
who is calculating
I know, but
costs
we're
and
safe and warm in
possibilities
here.
in real
Okay.
time.
I feel better now.
Beryl Fenwick listened more skeptically, from the position of someone whose husband had laughed at the project in April. Dorothea listened with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has watched a correct idea succeed against the expectation that it would fail. "Could it be done in an existing cabin?" Clara asked. "Not starting from scratch?" Martha had thought about this. "The channel under the floor is the hard part," she said. "An existing cabin, you'd need to lift sections of flooring. But the channel itself, yes. The principle doesn't require it to be built first. It just requires the channel to get under the floor somehow. How long did it take you? The digging and stonework,
It's all right,
working
my dear.
alone except
Everything
for
will be
Ben,
just fine.
about
But I'm
4
scared.
months.
It's so dark outside.
If a person
I
had
know,
help
but we're safe and
and
warm
knew the
in here.
layout
Okay.
beforehand,
I feel better
maybe
now.
2. Clara looked at the floor. She was quiet for a moment. "My husband is good with stone," she said, mostly to herself. Nothing was decided. No one asked Martha to build anything or design anything or consult on anything. It was a kitchen conversation on a cold October day, 3 women talking practically about a practical problem. But Martha watched Clara Mott walk back up the road in the early dusk with the empty mixing bowl under her arm, and she had the distinct feeling that something had been set in motion. Elias Marsh stopped by that same week. On what basis exactly, Martha was not entirely clear, since he had no fence post healing over and no
It's all
borrowed
right, my
items
dear.
to return.
Everything will be just fine.
But I'm
She thought
scared.
about
It's
the
so
shed
dark
door,
outside.
which
I
hung
know,
wrong
but we're
and let
safe
in
and
more
warm in
cold
here.
than she
Okay.
liked.
I feel better
She
now.
said yes. He fixed the door in an hour. He stayed for coffee afterward, sitting at the table across from her account book and her brown paper drawings. And he asked questions about the system with the specific, detailed curiosity of a builder looking at a structure and wanting to understand how it worked. He had good questions. Martha found she had good answers. He came back. Martha looked
Stay
back at
close
him
to me.
steadily.
I'm cold.
For building,
I know. We'll
she
be
said.
inside soon.
A helper,
Let's go.
someone who knows stone and framing. Yes, Elias said, of course. But there was a quality to the pause before he wrote again that Martha filed away without comment. November arrived with the first serious cold. Not the testing cold of October, but the genuine article, the kind that killed ambition and froze the creek in the low bend and turned every outdoor task into a calculation of necessity versus suffering. The valley contracted. People stayed closer to their homes and their fires and their woodpiles. The Hale homestead stayed warm. Word of this traveled the way most worthwhile information travels in small communities, incrementally, through the specific medium of women talking to each other about practical matters. Clara Mott mentioned it to the wife of the blacksmith. The blacksmith's wife mentioned it to her sister-in-law, who was finding her first winter with a new baby a particular trial. Dorothea Voss, with the careful pride of someone who had watched the
Stay close
project
to
from
me.
its beginning,
I'm
answered
cold.
questions about
I
it
know.
at the
We'll
church
be
social
inside
in
soon.
early November,
Let's go.
with more detail than Martha herself would have offered. By mid-November, Martha had been asked to explain the system 4 times. She did so each time without hesitation and without embellishment. She drew the sketch, she explained the principle, she quoted the wood savings and the temperatures she'd recorded. She was not selling anything. She was not seeking approval. She was sharing the information the way her father had always shared information. Because useful knowledge belongs to the people who can use it, and keeping it to yourself is a kind of poverty. The 4th person to ask was the Reverend Aldous Crane, who was building a small addition onto the parsonage and was doing the work himself to keep the cost down. He'd been told by 3 separate congregants that Mrs. Hale had invented a heating method that worked. "I didn't invent it," Martha said. "The Romans invented it. I adapted it." "Can it be done in an addition?" the Reverend asked. "Already planning the foundation. Haven't dug yet." "If you plan the channel into the foundation
Stay close
before
to
it's
me.
laid," Martha
I'm
said,
cold.
"it's
I know.
considerably
We'll be
easier than
inside soon.
retrofit.
Let's go.
Have you got your drawings?" He had. They spread them on the table, and Martha spent an hour marking the channel placement with a pencil, noting the grade, showing where the fire pit should be sited relative to the prevailing winter winds. The Reverend took notes. He asked careful, intelligent questions. He was a methodical man. When he left, Martha sat for a while at the table. Ben came in from the shed where he'd been checking the goats' water, a morning responsibility he had taken on with great seriousness since the system had proven itself, as if the goats' comfort were now his personal achievement. "Who was that?" he asked. "Reverend Crane." "What did he want?" "Help with a building project." Ben pulled off his mittens and held his hands above the warm floor the way he had started doing every morning when he came in. A private ritual, she thought, of affirming that yes, it was still there. The warmth was still real. "Are you going to help him?" "I already did," Martha said.
Stay close
Ben
to
looked
me.
at her with the measuring
I'm
expression
cold.
he'd developed
I
this
know.
autumn.
We'll be inside soon.
A new face she
Let's
hadn't
go.
seen before he turned 7, as if he were regularly recalibrating his understanding of who his mother was. "Can I see the drawings?" She slid them across the table. He studied them for a long moment, small finger tracing the pencil line of the channel from pit to chimney. "It looks like the same as ours," he said. "It is the same as ours," Martha said. "That's the point." He looked up. "So other people will be warm too, if they build it right." He seemed to find this satisfying in a way that went past the idea and into something simpler and harder to name. He nodded once and slid the drawings back. December came, and the valley entered its deepest cold. Temperatures dropped to the single digits for the better part of 2 weeks in mid-December, plunging to -12 on the night of the 19th. The creek froze solid at the low bend. The wagon road became a series of frozen ridges that the mule navigated with dignified annoyance. The sky turned a
Stay
pale,
close to me.
hard gray
I'm
that
cold.
presaged more
I
snow.
know. We'll be inside
And by
soon.
Christmas Eve,
Let's go.
there were 8 inches on the ground, with another 4 arriving from the northwest. At the Hale homestead, the cabin was 61 degrees at floor level. The goats had gained weight since October rather than losing it. Ben's cough, a slight rattling he'd had every previous winter, the result of cold, damp air in a poorly heated cabin, had not materialized this year. The woodpile, which Martha checked every Sunday, was being consumed at roughly 40% of the previous year's rate. She wrote it all in the account book, column by column, week by week. She also, on Christmas Eve, accepted an invitation to the Van Leuvens for supper. The brothers' mother had arrived from the east in November and had taken over the social operation of their household with formidable energy, and found herself seated at a table with 11 other people from the valley, including Elias Marsh, Clara and Thomas Mott, Dorothea Voss, and Harold Fenwick, who had the grace to appear slightly sheepish when the conversation turned, as it inevitably
Stay
did,
close to me.
to the question of how
I'm
the
cold.
Hale homestead
I
had
know.
come through
We'll be
the cold
inside
snap.
soon. Let's go.
61 degrees, Ben said, from his end of the table, in the tone of a person who has been waiting for the appropriate moment. There was a pause. "Inside the cabin?" Beryl Fenwick asked. "At the floor," Martha said. "Warmer at chair height, cooler toward the ceiling as heat stratifies upward, but the living level stays comfortable." "In -12, Harold Fenwick said. "In -12, Martha confirmed. Fenwick was quiet for a moment. He cut his meat with more attention than it required. Then he looked up and said, "I told people it was foolish." "I know you did," Martha said. "I may have been hasty." The table was watching this exchange with the avidity of people watching something they will describe later. "You may have been," Martha agreed pleasantly. Thomas Mott, who was a solidly built man from Wisconsin, who had said approximately 40 words total in Martha's presence over the previous 6 months, leaned forward with his elbows on the table.
Stay close to me.
"My wife has been
I'm
talking
cold.
about this all fall,"
I know. We'll be
he said.
inside soon.
"I'd like
Let's
to build
go.
one. After the thaw. If you'd be willing to explain the specifics, the measurements, the materials." "I'll write it out for you," Martha said. "Channel dimensions, stone specifications, grade per foot, everything you need." "I can help with the carpentry side," Elias said. He said it to the table, not specifically to Martha, which she noted. Thomas Mott looked at Elias and then at Martha. "Between the two of you, then?" "Between the two of us," Martha said. That was how it was decided, over roasted chicken and boiled potatoes in the Van Leuven kitchen, on Christmas Eve, 1886, in the informal way that most worthwhile things in small communities are decided, without ceremony, without official announcement, without anyone raising their hand. In January, while the cold continued its siege of the valley, Martha wrote out the specifications. She was thorough, not because she expected everyone who read it to build the system, but because if someone was going to build it, She wanted them
Stay
to build
close
it
to me.
correctly.
I'm
A
cold.
poorly built
I
channel
know.
would
We'll be
underperform,
inside soon.
and the version people
Let's go.
heard about would be the failed one, not the dozens of right ones. She drew 3 versions, the full system as she had built it, with channels under all 3 structures. A simplified single cabin version with a shorter channel, and a minimal version for a single room, which could be built in 4 weeks by 2 people with basic stonework skills. She made 4 copies by hand. The 5th she kept. Elias, who had come by twice in January on the pretext of checking the shed door, and then, abandoning pretexts entirely, on no pretext at all, read through the simplified version and made suggestions about the framing around the channel where it transitioned under the floor structure. His suggestions were good. She incorporated them. "You should put your name on these," he said one afternoon, watching her copy the amended version. "Why?" Martha asked. "Because you designed this." "I adapted it from a Roman principle." "You adapted it, tested it, refined it, and made it work
Stay
in
close
Montana
to me.
Territory in 1886.
I'm cold.
That's
I know.
design."
We'll be inside soon.
He paused.
Let's go.
"Your name should be on it." Martha looked at the paper. She looked at her handwriting filling it, column after column of measured and tested and true information. She wrote her name at the top of the page. Martha E. Hale, Willow Bench, Montana Territory, 1886. It was the first time she had put her name on anything since she'd signed the property deed after Daniel died. She felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically, not with any great announcement, but with the quiet certainty of a stone settling into its right place in a wall. She picked up the pen and made 4 more copies, each one with her name at the top. February brought a brief, tantalizing thaw. 3 days in which the temperature climbed to 38 and the south-facing eaves dripped, and Ben declared that spring was coming, a declaration his mother gently corrected. And then the cold returned for its final push. In that final push, the valley's regard for the Hale heating system
Stay close to me.
underwent a quiet,
I'm
collective revision.
I know. We'll be inside
The
soon.
Reverend Crane had broken
Let's go.
ground on his parsonage addition in early January, using Martha's channel specifications and Elias's framing details, working on the days when the ground could be persuaded to cooperate. He had the channel substantially complete by early February, and when he lit the first fire in the new pit on the 3rd, his addition, still unplastered, still smelling of fresh sawdust, was warmer at floor level than the existing parsonage, which had a full fireplace and a sheet iron stove. He told the congregation this on Sunday. He gave Martha credit, by name, from the pulpit. Martha, sitting in the 3rd pew with Ben pressed against her side and Dorothea on her other flank, felt the congregation's attention land on her like sunlight through a window, warm and slightly startling. She did not stand up or acknowledge it particularly. She was not a person who required acknowledgement, but she felt it. On the road home, Dorothea walking beside the wagon, Ben riding in the back with his legs dangling, Dorothea said,
Stay close to me.
Harold Fenwick was nodding.
I'm cold.
I know.
"I noticed,"
We'll be inside
Martha
soon.
said.
Let's go.
"He will ask you about building one on his property before April." "Probably. You should charge him something." Martha looked at the road ahead. Porter's ears swiveled back and then forward. "What would be fair?" she asked. "His honest labor," Dorothea said. 4 days' help on whatever you need done in the spring. A man who can afford to run a cattle operation can afford to pay in work. Martha thought about the raised beds she still hadn't finished. The fence section on the east that Fenwick himself had pointed out in October. The garden boundary wall she'd been intending to build since August. "That's fair," she said. Dorothea nodded with the satisfaction of a woman whose suggestions are adopted. Ben called from the back, "Are we going to build them for other people?" Martha and Dorothea exchanged a glance. "We are going to help other people build their own," Martha said. Ben appeared to find this an excellent answer. He swung his legs against the wagon boards and looked at the sky. The
Stay
letter
close to
arrived
me.
on the 14th of
I'm
March,
cold.
forwarded
I know.
through the
We'll be
Territorial
inside soon.
Land Office in Helena,
Let's go.
and delivered by the Willow Bench postmaster with an air of importance that suggested he had read enough of the return address to consider it significant. It was from a Mr. Aldous Pruitt, secretary of the Territorial Agricultural Society, based in Helena. The letter was formal and brief. The society had received accounts from Reverend Crane, from a Dr. Emmett Hartley, who had apparently been traveling through the valley in February for unrelated purposes, and had heard about the Hale heating system from three separate people in one afternoon, of a passive ground channel heating method of apparent effectiveness and economy. The society was preparing a new edition of its Practical Guide to Montana Homesteading, and wished to consider including a technical description of the method. Would Mrs. Hale be willing to correspond regarding the specifications? Martha read the letter twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at it for a while. Ben came in from the shed. He read the letter over her shoulder. He was a good reader for 7,
The harvest wasn't
an
enough.
achievement
We're
she
short.
took a quiet pride in.
We have to
and
be
said,
careful.
What about the
"What's
money
the
for
Agricultural
the new seeds?
Society?"
We'll have to sell some land.
"They publish
It's our
guides for
only choice.
homesteaders," Martha said. "Practical information. Like your drawings. Like my drawings." "They want to put your drawings in a book?" Martha looked at the letter again. The formal language, the institutional letterhead, the name of Dr. Hartley, who had heard about her work from 3 people in an afternoon. "They want to consider it," she said. "But it might happen." "Yes," Martha said, "it might." She picked up the letter and set it carefully inside her account book. The reply Martha sent to Mr. Pruitt was measured and professional. She included a copy of the simplified single-cabin specification, the cleanest version, the one she had redrawn 3 times until the proportions were right and the language was exact, along with a short description of the results she had documented over the winter. Temperatures achieved, wood consumption, comparative performance against a standard fireplace. She was careful about what she claimed. She said what she had measured and nothing more.
The harvest wasn't
The
enough.
reply
We're
came in
short.
5 weeks.
I know.
Mr.
We have to be
Pruitt
careful.
thanked her for the
about the
materials and
money for the
indicated
new
that the
seeds?
society's
We'll
technical
have to sell
committee
some
would
land.
review them.
It's our only choice.
He also mentioned, in a tone that Martha found slightly more guarded than his first letter, that the society had received a second submission on a similar topic, a method for underground heating developed by a Mr. Cass Beaumont of Glendive, and that the committee would be reviewing both. Martha had not heard of Cass Beaumont. She asked around carefully. Elias, who had more connections in the territory's building trades than she did, made inquiries and reported back over coffee one afternoon in April. Beaumont was a contractor, well established, with a reputation for brick and masonry work. He had been building structures in eastern Montana for 12 years. He was a man of some standing in the territorial building community. "Has he built an underground heating system?" Martha asked. "Not that anyone I spoke to knows of," Elias said. "What he's apparently submitted to the society is a proposal, a design he says he intends to build this summer." Martha turned this over.
The harvest wasn't
"He
enough.
submitted
We're
a
short.
design
I
he
know.
hasn't built.
We have to be careful.
What
Against
about the
your
money for
design
the
that you
new
have built
seeds?
and documented?"
We'll have to sell some land.
"Yes."
It's our only choice.
Elias watched her with the attentiveness she had come to recognize as his form of concern. He didn't fuss. He paid attention. "That seems like a straightforward comparison," he said. "It ought to be," Martha said. It was not. The difficulty emerged gradually, over a series of letters from Mr. Pruitt through April and into May. The committee had questions. Specifically, the committee had questions about verification. Mrs. Hale's results were self-reported. The temperature readings came from a homemade instrument calibrated against a borrowed one. The wood consumption estimates came from her own account book. There had been no independent observation of the system during operation. Mr. Beaumont, meanwhile, had submitted technical drawings prepared by a professional surveyor, with material specifications that cited established masonry standards. He had letters of reference from 3 contractors in Glendive. Martha read the third letter from Pruitt 3 times. She understood what was
The
happening.
harvest wasn't enough. We're short.
It was not dishonest,
I know.
exactly.
We have to be
The
careful.
committee wasn't lying.
What about the money for
They
the
weren't
new
favoring
seeds?
Beaumont for
We'll have
corrupt
to
reasons.
sell some land. It's our
They
only
were doing
choice.
what institutions do, weighting credentials and documentation over results, formal presentation over demonstrated reality. Beaumont had the right-looking papers. She had a warm cabin. She wrote back to Pruitt. She was polite and precise. She noted that her system had operated through the winter of 1886-87 without failure. that it had been observed and used by multiple residents of the Willow Bench Valley, and that she was willing to arrange independent verification. She asked whether the committee would accept signed statements from persons who had visited the homestead and observed the system in operation. The reply was slow in coming and non-committal when it arrived. The committee appreciated her thoroughness. They were still reviewing. The guide would not be published until fall, so there was time. Meanwhile, in Willow Bench, something else was beginning to shift. Harold Fenwick had indeed asked, in the first week of April, about building the system on his property.
The harvest wasn't enough. We're short.
He asked formally,
I know.
in the
You have to be
businesslike
careful.
way he did most
What about the
things.
money for the new
And Martha
seeds?
had agreed to the
We'll have to
terms
sell some
Dorothea
land.
had suggested.
It's our only choice.
4 days of labor in exchange for the consultation and the drawings. Thomas Mott had started his own excavation. The Van Leuven brothers, after a long discussion with their mother that apparently lasted the better part of a Sunday afternoon, had committed to building the system on their farmhouse before the next winter. This was good. This was exactly what Martha had hoped for. The knowledge spreading, people staying warmer, the valley improving itself through practical collaboration. But she heard, through Clara Mott in May, that there was a version of the story circulating that she didn't recognize. Someone told Ida Mae Colburn, Clara said carefully, sitting at Martha's table with her hands around a cup of tea, that there's a man in Glendive who invented this heating method, and that you saw his drawings somewhere and copied them. Martha was quiet for a moment. Cass Beaumont, she said. Clara's expression confirmed it. I don't know where the story came from. I don't believe it. But Ida Mae told it
The
to 3
harvest
people.
wasn't enough. We're short.
I know,
We have
Martha
to be
said.
careful.
She
What
had
about
already
the
heard
money
it
for
from
the
2
new
of them.
seeds?
We'll have
She
to
sat
sell
with
some
this.
land. It's our only choice.
She had designed the system in April of 1886. She had been digging since April of 1886. She had a year's worth of documentation and a season's worth of results, and a set of neighbors who had stood in her warm cabin in December and January and could speak to what they had seen. She had a 7-year-old son who had watched her build every inch of it, none of which was the kind of evidence that stopped a rumor once it was in motion. The story, once started, moved the way stories do in a small valley. Not loudly, not as accusation, but as question. Hadn't someone heard something about a man in Glendive? Did anyone know who had the original idea? The question mark was the weapon. It didn't need to resolve into a conclusion. It only needed to exist, to make people slightly less certain, slightly more hesitant about what they were prepared to say on the subject. Martha felt this hesitation most clearly in the way conversations changed. At the Trading
harvest
Post
wasn't
in
enough.
May,
We're short.
the feed store
I know.
clerk who had
We
barely
have to be
concealed
careful.
his amusement
What
about
about
the
money
trench the
for the new
previous year
seeds?
now
We'll
asked
have to sell some
carefully
land.
neutral questions,
It's our only choice.
as if he were a fair-minded man waiting for all the facts to be in. Harold Fenwick, who had been solidly supportive since Christmas and had his own channel half dug, suddenly had less to say on the subject in company, though in private he was unchanged. Only Dorothea Voss and Clara Mott and Elias remained constant, forthright in what they knew, uncomplicated in their support. It was Elias who found out where the story had originated. He told Martha on a Thursday evening in late May, sitting at the table where they had spread the drawings many times through the winter. He told her directly, without preamble, because he had learned that she preferred directness. Beaumont has a cousin in Helena who knows one of the Agricultural Society committee members, he said. Apparently Beaumont told his cousin, told several people, that he'd been developing this system for years, and that someone in western Montana had gotten hold of his ideas through the Masonry Supply Network. Through the Masonry Supply Network, Martha repeated.
The harvest wasn't enough.
He's
We're
a
short.
contractor.
I know.
He buys
We have to
stone
be
and
careful.
mortar in quantity.
What about the money for
He
the
knows
new
every
seeds?
supplier in eastern
We'll have
Montana.
to sell some land. It's our only choice.
I bought shale from a cut bank on my own property, Martha said. I bought clay from a riverbed. I bought nothing from any masonry supplier. I know that. The committee knows that too if they've read my specifications. They know what's in the documents, Elias said carefully. But Beaumont is a credentialed professional with a social network that extends to Helena. That carries weight with people who don't know either of you. Martha stood up from the table and went to the window. The evening light was long and gold, the kind of May light that made the valley look like a promise. The garden was coming in. the raised beds she and Ben had built from the soil excavated by the trench, which produced vegetables with a volume and quality that still surprised her. She thought about her father. He had been a millwright in a county where the other millwrights were men who had been doing it for 20 years and had agreements with each other about pricing and work territory. When he'd arrived and set up his own operation, better than theirs in certain
The harvest
ways,
wasn't enough. We're
cheaper
short.
in others,
I know.
the first
We have
thing
to be
they had
careful.
done was
What about the
question his
money for the new
credentials.
seeds?
Not his
We'll have
work,
to sell some land.
his credentials.
It's our only choice.
Her father had solved it by simply doing the work, publicly, until the work spoke for itself. The problem was that the work was already speaking for itself, and it wasn't quite enough. "I need independent verification," she said, not turning from the window. "Not the committee. Someone who isn't connected to the society." "What kind of verification?" She thought about it. "A professional, an engineer, if there is one in the territory. Someone whose opinion people will credit." "There's a mining engineer in Butte," Elias said. "Hartley, the man who first wrote to the society about your system. He's not a building engineer, but he understands thermodynamics and heat transfer. His opinion would carry weight." Martha turned. "Dr. Emmett Hartley, the one who wrote to Pruitt." "He wrote to Pruitt because he was impressed," Elias said. "He's already inclined toward the system. Could you write to him?
The harvest
Through
wasn't
your building
enough. We're
contacts?"
short.
I know.
"I could
We have
write
be
to him
careful.
directly."
What about the
Elias
money
said.
for the new seeds?
"I've met him.
We'll have to sell
We
some
worked on
land.
the same site
It's
in
our only
84,
choice.
briefly." Martha looked at him. The evening light was in the room now, settling on the table with the drawings spread across it, her name at the top of each one. "Would you do that?" she asked. "I already intend to," he said. This was the quality in him that she had come to rely on without quite deciding to. The specific steadiness of a person who identified what was needed and then simply prepared to do it, without requiring much ceremony around the decision. It was, she recognized with the wry clarity that came from knowing herself, more or less the quality she most valued in herself. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "I've been asked by a family in Miles City, the Calder family, building a new home, to oversee the carpentry on the project. It's a good commission, 3 months' work." "That's good," Martha said. "It would take me away from the valley from July to September." She looked at him. "I want
The
you to know
harvest
that
wasn't
before
enough.
we
We're
decide
short.
anything,"
I
he
know.
said,
We have to be careful.
"about any of it."
What about the money for the new
She
seeds?
understood what he was not
We'll
quite
have to sell
saying.
some land. It's our
She had
only
understood
choice.
it for some time if she was honest with herself, which she generally tried to be. "How often do people get letters in Miles City?" she asked. He looked at her with the expression she had come to think of as his version of a smile, reserved, careful, and quite genuine. "Regularly," he said. "The post is excellent in Miles City." Martha looked at her drawings on the table. "Write to Dr. Hartley," she said. "Then go to Miles City. We'll manage the rest as it comes." June was the complicated month. Thomas Mott completed his channel and lit his first fire, and the results matched Martha's specifications with a closeness that she found both gratifying and useful. A second documented installation, a second set of measurements, a second property she could point to. She and Ben rode out on a Monday in mid-June, and Martha spent the morning checking Thomas's joints and capstones, correcting 2 places where settling had opened gaps that needed
The harvest wasn't
rechinking,
enough. We're short.
showing Clara how
I
to
know.
manage the
We have
fire
to be
for the
careful.
transition
What
between
about the money
seasons
for the new
when the
seeds?
target temperature was
We'll have
lower
to sell some land.
and the draft
It's our only
required
choice.
different calibration. Clara moved through the lesson with the efficient absorption of someone who intends never to be cold again. Thomas watched from the yard with his arms folded and the expression of a man who is reassessing the general category of things women can design. Martha said nothing about the reassessment. She answered the questions and documented the measurements and drove back home in the afternoon, thinking about how the second installation had performed differently in 2 ways she hadn't expected. Both related to the soil composition under Thomas's floor, which was more clay-rich than her own, and therefore released heat more slowly, but held it longer. She wrote this in the account book. She was still writing when Ben came in from the evening chores and said, casually, setting down his bucket, Mr. Fenwick told Caleb Fenwick today that he's not sure the system is Mr. Beaumont's idea or yours. Martha stopped writing. Where did you hear this? Caleb told me at the creek. He said his father isn't
The
sure
harvest wasn't
anymore
enough.
who
We're
had the
short.
idea first.
I know. We have to
She
be
set
careful.
the pen down.
What about the money for the
Harold
new
Fenwick
seeds?
had been building his
We'll have
own
to sell
channel
some
for
land.
6 weeks.
It's our only choice.
He had the drawings, her drawings, with her name at the top. He had stood in her cabin in December and felt the floor with his own hand and said, "I may have been hasty." "What did you tell Caleb?" she asked. "I told him that we started digging in April of last year," Ben said, with the exact calm of a child repeating a fact he is certain of. "And that you drew the plans in April of last year, and that the plans have your name on them because you made them." Martha looked at her son. He was 7, nearly 8 now, she realized. His birthday was in September. He was standing in the lamplight in the warm cabin with the steady assurance of a child who has watched something built from nothing and knows its history. "That's correct," she said. "I know," said Ben, and went to wash for supper. She picked up the pen. She began writing again. But she was thinking about Harold Fenwick. She called on Fenwick
That's
the
it.
following
Keep going.
morning. She drove
this?
Porter to his property and found
Yes,
him in
just
the
like
yard,
that. You're doing
checking the
so
progress
well.
of his own trench, which
It's
had
fun
reached the
riding by
halfway
the
point.
river.
It is.
He looked up when she arrived and had the expression of a man who had been expecting this conversation. She did not make him wait for it. "I hear you're uncertain about the provenance of the design," she said. Fenwick was quiet for a moment. He looked at the trench. "People are talking," he said. "Beaumont has some standing in the territory." "He has a design he hasn't built," Martha said. "I have a system that has operated for 1 full winter, fully documented, observed by most of the people in this valley, including you." "I know what I've seen," Fenwick said. "I'm not saying I believe the other story." "But you're not saying you don't." He looked at her directly then. Harold Fenwick was not a bad man. He was a man of his community, which meant his opinions were shaped partly by evidence
That's it. Keep
and
going.
partly by the weight of other
Like
people's
this?
opinions.
Yes, just
And when
like
those
that.
two
You're
things
doing
pulled
so
in
well.
different directions, he
It's
sometimes
fun
stalled
riding by the
between them.
river.
It is.
"What would settle it?" he asked. "Dr. Emmett Hartley," Martha said, "a mining engineer from Butte who has already written to the Agricultural Society in support of the system. He has agreed to come to Willow Bench and inspect both installations, mine and the Mott's, and provide a formal assessment. Date to be determined, but before August." Fenwick looked at her. "A mining engineer who has no connection to Beaumont, no connection to me, and no stake in the outcome except the factual one." He was quiet for a moment. "That would settle it," he said. "Yes," Martha said, "it would." She drove back home along the wagon road, the morning light strong and clean on the grass and the ridge. She had written to Dr. Hartley herself
that's
3
it. Keep
days
going.
after Elias had first
Like this?
mentioned him, through
Yes,
Elias's
just like
contact,
that. You're doing so
and had
well.
received a reply in 2 weeks.
It's fun
that was
riding by the
warm,
river.
direct,
It is.
and genuinely interested. He would come. He was curious about the system on its own merits. He would provide a written assessment. The letter from Hartley was in her account book, beside the letter from Pruitt, beside her original drawings. She had the documentation. She had the results. She had an engineer coming to verify both. What she had lost, slightly, was the easy goodwill of a community that had been hers since December. She intended to get it back, not by fighting for it, but by simply, plainly, demonstrating the truth. The weeks between Fenwick's uncertainty and Hartley's arrival were the longest of the summer. Martha kept herself to the work, the garden, the goats, the ongoing correspondence with Pruitt, a careful and detailed letter to the Agricultural Society Committee
That's
laying
it.
out the
Keep
chronology
going.
of her design
Like
and
this?
construction in plain,
Yes, just like
ordered
that.
terms,
You're doing so well.
citing every date,
It's
every
fun
source,
riding by the river.
every person
It
who
is.
had visited the homestead during construction or operation. She was not accusatory. She was not emotional. She was methodical in the way her father had taught her to be when a problem required clear thinking. Organize the facts, present them sequentially, let the record speak. Elias had left for Miles City in late June. His letters arrived every 2 weeks, regular, detailed, practical, with a quality she appreciated. He told her what was actually happening on the Calder job, the specific problems of the lumber, and the setbacks in the stone foundation, the conversations he was having. He treated her as someone who wanted the real account, not a managed one. She wrote back in kind. She told him about Fenwick, about the letter to Hartley, about Ben's response to Caleb's
That's
report.
it. Keep going.
She told him
Like
the Van
this?
Leuven brothers had begun their
Yes,
excavation,
just like that. You're doing
and
so
that their
well.
mother had appointed herself project
fun
supervisor
riding by the river.
and was,
It is.
by all accounts, doing an excellent job. She also told him, in one letter, that the doubt of others had been harder than she expected. Not because she needed people to believe in her. She had gotten through 2 years on this homestead without the Valley's endorsement, but because the system worked, and people staying warm mattered more than her standing. And if the confusion about its origins caused people not to build it, they would be cold. That was what kept her awake. His reply to that letter was the one she reread most often. He wrote, "A woman who built something real will always outlast a man who built something on paper. The Valley will come to know this, and so will Helena. The only question is the time it takes. Use the time well. You are."
That's it.
She
Keep
was
going.
not, by nature,
Like
a person
this?
who kept letters.
Yes, just like
She
that.
kept
You're
this
doing
one.
so well.
Ben, who
It's
had become
fun
her
riding by
unofficial
the river.
chronicler through
It
the
is.
summer, began keeping his own record that July, a small notebook she had given him for arithmetic, repurposed into a journal. He wrote in it every evening, the temperature, the weather, what happened. She found this the most useful documentation of all. The letter from Pruitt arrived on the 28th of July. It was short. The committee had concluded its review. In the absence of independent professional verification, her documentation being self-reported and therefore outside the committee's verification standards, the committee had determined that the submission with the strongest technical credentials would be featured in the guide. Mr. Beaumont's submission, being prepared by a professional surveyor and supported by letters from established contractors, met that standard. Mrs. Hale's submission, though compelling in its
That's it.
results,
Keep going.
could not be independently
this?
confirmed in the time frame
Yes,
available.
just like that. You're doing so
The
well.
guide would go to print in August.
It's fun riding by
Martha
the river.
set the letter down
It
on the
is.
table. The cabin was cool. It was July, so the pit had been cold for weeks, but the thermal mass of the earth around the channel kept the floor noticeably cooler than the air outside, which was an unintended benefit she had begun to think of as the summer complement to the winter function. The system worked in both directions. She had meant to write to Pruitt about this. She looked at the letter. She had built everything. She had documented everything. She had a community of neighbors who could testify to what they had seen and felt. She had a mining engineer 2 weeks away from arriving to provide the independent verification the committee wanted. 2 weeks too late. Beaumont's version, unbuilt, theoretical, decorated with professional surveyors' stamps and contractors' letters, would be the one that went into the guide. The one that homesteaders
That's it.
across
Keep
Montana
going.
Territory would
Like
read
this?
and attempt to build
Yes,
this
just
coming
like
winter.
that. You're doing so well.
She looked at the letter for a long
It's
time.
fun riding by the river.
Then she went to
It
find
is.
Ben. She found him at the creek, sitting on the bank with his feet in the water and his journal open on his knee, writing with his tongue between his teeth. He looked up when she came through the grass, read her face with the accuracy that had been developing in him all year, and closed the journal. What happened? She sat down beside him on the bank. The creek was low in July, more sound than water, running over the smooth stones with a quiet persistence. She told him about the letter. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he thought about it. "So Mr. Beaumont's thing will be in the book," he said. "Yes. Even though it doesn't work yet." Even though. Ben looked at the water. "That doesn't seem right." "No," Martha said. "It doesn't." They sat
That's
there
it.
for a
Keep
while.
going.
A kingfisher
this?
crossed the creek downstream.
Yes, just
a
like that.
streak
You're
of
doing
blue
so
and
well.
orange, and landed in the willows.
It's fun riding by the river.
Martha thought
It
about the
is.
homesteaders who would read the guide in the fall and attempt Beaumont's design. A design she suspected was workable in its broad strokes, but wrong in several details that she knew from her own errors, the ones she had corrected in the building. The grade was too steep in the version Beaumont had proposed in his submission. She had tried that grade in her second channel section, not knowing better, and corrected it when she saw the result. Someone building from Beaumont's specifications would have a system that underperformed, and they would blame the method rather than the error, and the method was sound. She thought about that. The method was sound. The system worked. The Earth held heat the way it always had, indifferent to documentation standards and committee timelines and the question of whose name was at the top of the page.
That's it. Keep going.
What does Dr. Hartley say
Like
when
this?
he comes? Ben asked.
Yes, just like that.
He'll
You're
confirm
doing
what's
so
here.
well.
Both installations.
It's fun riding
But the
by the
guide
river.
will already be
It
printed.
is.
Can't it be corrected? Martha looked at her son. What do you mean? If the book is wrong, Ben said, with the straightforward practicality of someone who hasn't yet learned that institutions don't readily admit error, can't someone tell them it's wrong, and then they fix it? She started to give him the adult answer, the one about institutional momentum and the difficulty of reversing published decisions and the weight of professional credentials in committee rooms in Helena. She stopped. She thought about Hartley's letter. She thought about what a written professional assessment, arriving in Helena in August with specific technical findings about 2 operational installations, might do to a committee that had made a decision based on the absence of that assessment. She thought about what her father would have done.
That's it. Keep
He
going.
would not have accepted the first
Like
answer
this?
as final.
Yes,
He would
just
have
like
looked at
that.
what
You're doing
resources
so
he
well.
had, the work,
It's
the
fun
record,
riding by the
truth
river.
of the functioning
is.
thing, and he would have used them. Not loudly, not with grievance or accusation, with evidence plainly offered to anyone in a position to act on it. She still had 2 weeks before the guide went to print. She had the account book. She had Ben's journal. She had the Mott's installation and Fenwick's channel nearly complete. She had Dr. Hartley coming. She stood up from the bank. "Get your journal," she said to Ben. She wrote to Pruitt that evening. It was not a protest. It was not an appeal to fairness or a complaint about the process. It was a single, specific question. When exactly did the guide go to print? And was there any mechanism by which verified addenda could be incorporated before that date? She also wrote to Dr. Hartley, updating him on the committee's
That's it.
decision
Keep going.
and asking whether
Like
he could
this?
arrive before the 5th of
Yes,
August.
just like that. You're
rather
doing
than the
so
10th.
well.
She wrote
It's
to
fun
Elias,
riding by the
not
river.
asking him to come
It
back.
is.
She wouldn't do that, but telling him what had happened and what she intended. She wrote to Reverend Crane, whose parsonage edition was now the 3rd operational installation of the system in the valley, and asked whether he would be willing to provide a signed letter describing his results to the Agricultural Society. She wrote to Thomas Mott, asking the same. Then she got out the account book and Ben's journal and spread them on the table, and began to read through both from the beginning, making a clean summary sheet of every measurement, every observation, every date. Ben sat across from her with his pencil, contributing dates and details from his own records that she had not thought to note at the time. The exact day the floor first felt warm to him, the day Pepper and Clove stopped pressing against the south wall for warmth, the day Clara Mott
That's
sat on
it.
the
Keep
floor.
going.
The
Like
lamp
this?
burned late.
Yes, just like
Dr.
that. You're
Emmett
doing
Hartley
so
arrived
well.
in Willow Bench on the 3rd of
It's
August,
fun riding by
2
the
days
river.
earlier than
It
originally
is.
planned, on a gray morning with the smell of rain coming from the northwest. He was a compact man of 50, with the working hands and direct manner of someone who had spent his career underground and in machine rooms, and he shook Martha's hand at the gate with the specific firmness of a person to whom credentials are work, not theater. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I've read your specifications 3 times. I want to see the installation before I say anything." "Of course," she said. "Ben, will you open the pit?" Ben, who had been waiting for this with barely contained officiousness, lifted the stone cap on its iron rod and revealed the ash bed of the fire pit, while Martha led Hartley along the channel route. She had lifted 1 capstone in 3 places along the length to allow inspection of the interior,
That's it. Keep
replacing
going.
them with flat
Like
boards that
this?
could be removed in seconds.
Yes, just like that. You're doing
Hartley
so
went
well.
to his knees without ceremony
It's fun
and
riding
looked
by
into
the
each
river.
opening with
It
a lantern.
is.
He pressed his hands against the channel floor, checked the mortar joints, measured the interior dimensions with a folding rule from his coat pocket. He was thorough and quiet, the way good engineers are quiet, concentrating rather than withholding. At the cabin end, where the channel rose to join the chimney flue, he spent a long time lying flat on the floor with the lantern, examining the junction. You modified this from the original design, he said from the floor. The first draft had the channel rising steeper, Martha said. Too much draft resistance. I shallowed it after the first test. When? End of July 1886. Before any cold weather. The test fire showed the issue. He got up. He brushed the knees of his trousers. He looked at the floor.
Ah, that's it. Keep going.
The floor feels different,
Like this?
he said.
Yes, just
It
like
was
that.
July.
You're doing so
The
well.
system was not running.
It's
But
fun
the thermal
riding by
mass
the river.
effect Martha
It
had
is.
observed was still present. The floor was cooler than the air above, which Hartley paused on. You noted this in your letter. Summer cooling, unintentional. The earth around the channel maintains a stable temperature year-round. In winter, it releases heat to the passing air. In summer, it absorbs heat from the floor above. Hartley nodded slowly. He was making notes in a small black book. They drove to the Mott farm in the afternoon. Thomas Mott met them at the door with the air of a man who had been rehearsing his account and delivered it fully. When the channel was dug, when the fire was first lit, what temperatures Clara had measured. Clara had the measurements organized on a piece of paper and handed them to Hartley without being asked. He read them carefully. He inspected the Mott installation with the same
That's it.
thoroughness.
Keep going.
Floor,
Like this?
joints, pit,
Yes, just like
chimney
that. You're doing
junction.
so well.
He noted the clay soil
It's
variation.
fun riding by the river.
He noted
It
the
is.
different heat release timing that Martha had documented. On the drive back to the Hale homestead in the early evening, Hartley sat on the wagon seat beside her and made notes for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "How many of these have you consulted on now, not including your own?" 3 active installations, 1 planned. And the one at the parsonage? Operational since February. Reverend Crane will be at my cabin tomorrow morning if you'd like to hear his account. I would, he wrote something. What did Beaumont's design get wrong? Martha glanced at him. You've read his submission. I've read it. I want to know what you think it gets wrong. The channel grade is too steep at the chimney junction. 1 in 8 rather than 1 in 12.
What a lovely story
It'll
this
create
is.
back pressure on
Is it an
cold
adventure
days when
story?
the draw is strongest.
Yes, it is. See
The
here?
system will still
Wow,
function,
can we read it
but at
together?
reduced efficiency.
Of course we can.
Homesteaders will think the method is at fault when it's the specification. Hartley wrote, Anything else? He hasn't specified the air gap between the capstone and the subfloor. If the gap is too small, less than 2 inches, heat distribution across the floor is uneven. The near end is warm and the far end is cold, and people will assume the channel is too short. 2 things fixable in an errata notice, Hartley said. Martha looked at the road. Yes, she said carefully, if someone published one. What is the print date for the guide? Mr. Pruitt said the 12th of August. Hartley closed his small notebook. Mrs. Hale, he said, I have been a member of the Agricultural Society's Advisory Committee for 6 years. I have never submitted a technical
lovely story
assessment for a
this
guide
is.
publication
Is it
before
an adventure story?
because I have never been moved
Yes, it
to.
is. See here?
The committee
Wow,
is
can
not
we
corrupt.
read it together?
They are
Of
simply
course we can.
cautious about what they don't know. I understand that, Martha said. What I am going to give them, he said, is a 9-page technical assessment with detailed site measurements, comparative analysis of both installations, specific notation of the Beaumont design's technical shortcomings, and a formal recommendation that the guide's heating section be revised before publication. He paused. I will have it drafted by the 6th. It will reach Helena by the 10th. Martha kept her eyes on the road. The evening light was extraordinary, gold and long, lying across the valley like a hand laid flat on a warm surface. Thank you, she said. Hartley shook his head. Don't thank me. The work is good. I'm just writing down what the work is. The assessment arrived in Helena on the 9th.
What a lovely story this
Martha
is.
knew this because
Is it an
Hartley sent
adventure
her a
story?
telegram from the Willow
Yes,
Bench
it is. See
Telegraph
here?
office on the
Wow,
10th.
can we read it together?
Document
course
received,
we can.
Helena. Pruitt confirms receipt. Assessment complete. 9 pages, 4 diagrams. Print date under review. She read the telegram twice at the telegraph office counter, thanked Mr. Gleason behind the counter, walked outside into the August morning, and stood on the wooden sidewalk of Front Street for a moment. A woman she didn't know very well, Mrs. Alderholt from the north end of the valley passed her on the sidewalk and nodded pleasantly. 3 buildings down, she could see Ida Mae Colburn turning the sign in the millinery window to open. The trading post across the street was receiving a delivery, the driver calling something cheerful to the clerk. Willow bench in August, ordinary and familiar and entirely unchanged. She drove home. The letter from Pruitt came on the 16th. It was longer than his
What a
previous
lovely
letters
story this is.
and more carefully
Is it an
written.
adventure story?
The formal, bureaucratic
Yes, it is.
quality
See
of
here?
someone who is
Wow,
correcting
can we
a
read it
course
together?
and making the
course we
correction
can.
clear without drawing excessive attention to the fact that a correction was needed. The committee had reviewed Dr. Hartley's assessment. The committee agreed that the Beaumont specifications contained technical insufficiencies that would reduce system performance. The guide's heating section would be revised. The new text would incorporate Mrs. Hale's documented specifications, with full attribution, as the primary practical guide to underground channel heating. It would note that the method had been successfully installed and operated in the Willow Bench Valley, with results documented over the winter of 1886-87. Dr. Hartley's assessment would be excerpted in the technical notes. The guide would be delayed to the 22nd. This was within the publication window. He was, Pruitt
What a
wrote,
lovely story this
sorry
is.
for the initial
Is it an
decision.
adventure story?
The committee had worked
Yes,
from
it is. See
incomplete
here?
information.
Wow, can we read it together?
Martha set the letter
Of course
down.
we can.
Ben, who had been doing his arithmetic at the table and watching her read, looked up. Well? She slid the letter across to him. He read it with the focused efficiency of a child who has been following a story closely enough to know which parts matter. When he finished, he looked up. "Your name," he said. "Yes. In the book. In the book." He looked back at the letter one more time, then at her. His expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more considered than that. The expression of someone who has watched a long process complete itself and is absorbing what that means. "Papa would have liked this," he said. Martha looked at her son. He said it simply, as a fact, and it was a fact. Daniel had loved useful things and people
What
who
a lovely
made them.
story this is.
He had been that kind
Is it
of
an
man.
adventure story?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
she
See
said.
here?
Wow,
would
can
have.
we read it together?
They were
course
quiet
we
for a
can.
moment, which was the right thing to be. Then Elias arrived. He had finished the Calder job 3 days early and ridden back, arriving at the gate in the late afternoon with his toolbox in the wagon and the particular unhurried purposefulness of a man who knows what he intends. Martha went to the gate. "You're back early," she said. "The Calders were satisfied," he said. The chimney drew correctly. "Did you get my letter?" "I got your letter." He climbed down from the wagon. "I started back the morning after." She looked at him in the August light. He had been gone 6 weeks. He had written 4 letters. "The guide is running my specifications," she said, with attribution. He smiled. It was his full smile, not the reserved one. The
What a
one she
lovely
had seen
story
perhaps
this is.
4 times,
Is it an
and which
adventure
she had come
story?
to understand was
Yes, it
reserved
is.
for
See
things
here?
that genuinely
Wow,
moved
can we
him.
read it together?
Of course
I know,
we can.
he said. "Hartley telegrammed me." "He telegrammed you?" "He thought I might want to know promptly." He paused. He was right. Ben appeared at the cabin door, took in the situation with rapid assessment, and said, "Are you staying for supper?" Elias looked at Martha. "If I'm invited," he said. "You're invited," Martha said. He unhitched the horse and led it to the pasture, and Ben fell in beside him with the easy comfort of a child who has already made a determination about a person and is not revising it. Martha watched them from the gate for a moment. The man and the boy walking to the pasture fence, Ben talking about something with both hands. She went inside to see about supper. Over the meal, late August, the windows opened to the cooling evening.
What a lovely story
She
this
and
is.
Elias and Ben
Is it
went
an
through the
adventure
Pruitt
story?
letter together,
Yes,
and
it is.
Hartley's
See here?
telegram,
Wow,
and Ben's
can we
journal,
read it together?
which Hartley had
Of course we
requested a
can.
copy of for his own records, calling it the clearest temperature documentation he had encountered in the field. Ben received this distinction with the careful dignity of someone who is very pleased and is working hard not to let it become excessive. "What happens next?" Elias asked. "The guide is published," Martha said. People build it. It works or it doesn't. But the specification is correct now, so it will work if they build it correctly. And here? The Van Leuvens will need help finishing their channel before October. I can do the framing. I expected you would. He looked at her over the table. The lamp was lit. The window was open. The evening air was warm and moving. And other things, he said. And other things, she agreed. The Practical
lovely
Guide to
story this
Montana
is.
Homesteading,
Is it an
published
adventure
by the
story?
Territorial Agricultural
Yes, it is. See
Society
here?
on the 22nd
Wow,
of
can we
August,
read it together?
1887,
Of course we can.
contained 12 pages on heating and warmth. The section opened with a summary of established methods: fireplace, cast iron stove, tile stove, and then, under the heading Underground Channel Heating, a proven Montana adaptation, presented Martha E. Hale's specifications in full. The attribution read, "Designed, built, and documented by Mrs. Martha E. Hale, Willow Bench, Montana Territory, 1886-1887. Independently verified by Dr. Emmett Hartley, mining engineer, Butte, Montana Territory, August 1887. 500 copies were printed and distributed across Montana Territory." Martha held the guide for the first time on a September morning when Dorothea Voss brought it from town, having gone in for supplies and come back
What a
with
lovely
a copy
story
she had
this is.
purchased and read
Is
on
it
the
an
road
adventure
home,
story?
arriving at Martha's
Yes, it
gate
is.
with
See
it
here?
already open
Wow,
to the
can we
relevant
read it
section,
together?
and an
Of course we
expression that
can.
made words unnecessary. They sat at the kitchen table and read it together, Dorothea and Martha and Ben, who read more slowly than the women and kept falling behind and then suddenly catching up. "They got all the details right," Ben said when he finished. "They used my drawings directly," Martha said. "I can tell by the proportions." Dorothea set her hand flat on the table, a decisive gesture she reserved for conclusions. "Good," she said, and then, "Your father would be very pleased." Martha looked at the page with her name on it. She let herself look at it for a full minute, which was longer than she usually allowed herself to dwell on anything that was already decided and could not be improved by further examination. Then she closed the guide. The Van Leuven channel was finished the following week.
What a
ahead
lovely
of the
story
first
this
frost.
is.
Is it an
Elias
adventure
did the
story?
framing, and
Yes,
Martha
it is.
checked the
See
grade.
here?
Wow,
And Ben,
can we read it
now
together?
8 years old and
Of course we
entirely
can.
convinced of his essential role in the operation, carried the last section of capstone from the wagon to the trench, while Mrs. Van Leuven Sr. watched from the porch with her arms folded, and the expression of a woman who has seen a great deal and is prepared to be satisfied. The first frost came on the 3rd of October. The Van Leuven's floor was warm by evening. Martha heard about it from the older brother, who arrived at her gate 2 days later with a jar of honey and a handshake that communicated everything his limited conversational range could not. She went to church that Sunday. Elias sat beside her in the third pew, and if there was anything notable in this arrangement, the congregation of Willow Bench was polite enough not to comment on it in her hearing, and practical enough to understand that two people who had spent a year building something together had arrived at a
lovely
simple
story
and
this is.
sensible conclusion.
Is it an adventure story?
On the way home,
Yes, it is.
Ben
See
wrote
here?
in the back with
Wow,
his journal
can we read
and the
it
copy
together?
of the guide,
Of course we
which
can.
he was reading for the third time. The air was sharp and clean. The ridge was gold and rust above the valley. Porter moved steadily down the road, ears forward, unhurried. "Mama," Ben said from the back. "Yes?" "Next winter's going to be warmer than last winter." She looked at the valley laid out before her, the homesteads visible in the clear fall air, each one holding its particular promise of warmth. "Yes," said Martha, "it is." Clyde Reddick pulled his horse to a stop on the Willow Bench Road in the blue pre-dawn cold of January 1888 and stared. He had ridden this road for 20 years. He knew every fence post, every gate, every line of smoke from every chimney in the valley. He knew what a Montana morning was supposed to look like.
What a lovely
What he was
story
looking
this
at
is.
now was different.
Is it an adventure story?
Smoke rose from the
Yes,
ground.
it is. See here?
Not from
Wow,
one
can we
homestead,
read it together?
but from 3 in
course
his
we
line
can.
of sight. Thin, pale curls rising from flat stones set in frozen earth before 3 separate cabins. The cabins themselves glowed amber in the pre-dawn dark. One of them, the Van Leuven place, had a light in 2 windows, and smoke from both a chimney and a ground-level pit. And even at this distance and this hour, Clyde could see that no one in that house was suffering. He counted the chimneys. He counted the pits. He thought about the winter before, when he'd ridden past the Hale widow's place and seen smoke rising from her frozen yard and felt something he couldn't quite name. He could name it now. He had felt, that morning, that something was starting. He'd been right. The valley was warming up in the most literal sense. Homestead by homestead, channel by
What
channel.
a lovely story this
One
is.
practical woman's
Is it an
pencil
adventure
drawing
story?
spreading out from willow bench
Yes, it is. See
like
here?
heat through a
Wow,
stone
can we
floor.
read it together?
Slowly
Of course
at
we
first,
can.
then all at once, and then simply everywhere. Unremarkable, expected, the new ordinary. The way warmth becomes ordinary once you've built something that keeps it close. Clyde touched his heels to his horse and rode on. The valley glowed behind him in the dark. Thank you so much for watching the story all the way to the end. It truly means the world to me. I hope the story kept you company and maybe took you somewhere new for a little while. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving the video a hype and dropping a comment down below, letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I always love reading those. It amazes me every time just how far these stories travel. If this is your first time here, welcome. There are plenty more stories waiting for you on the channel, so feel free to stay and explore. And if you've been here before, thank you for coming back. It means more than you know. Sharing the video with a friend who loves a good story is also a wonderful way to support the channel. I'll see you in the next story. Take care.